Bull camper in the right place at the right time.
Joe Rose, touchdown Miami!
All right, here we are, another episode of Out to Pasture, Joe, and I tell you, we got a fun one today. You know, we're kind of getting around to guys that played and talking to a guy that actually came in and coached us.
On my side of the ball.
On your side of the ball.
By the way, he did it all back then.
And had a little bit of a bloodline to come in and coach.
Yeah, I would say so. A big one.
Yeah.
And David Shula.
David Shula with the old man. You know, I'm hesitant to kind of talk about him chewing our ass out too much. So I think we'll kind of stay away from that unless he brings it up.
That's under discipline. Let's just leave that alone
in discipline and
with that.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Good. Yeah.
Okay, so we got a lot of stories, and look, we'll get a little bit of got some health issues like all of us. We'll kind of get to that for our audience, and so let's bring him on. All right, here he is, Dave Shula. Hey, Dave, thanks for taking some time out for us, and you know, we've known you a long time. We've had a lot of tangibles going back and forth through our careers, and we just really appreciate you taking the time out and joining us here on Out to Pasture.
Well, it's great to see you guys again. You guys were a huge part of my young adulthood, and then as I got into coaching, and you know, it's been, I guess, almost over 45 years now since I've known you guys. And, you know, I don't know if I've ever said it to you personally or publicly, but, you know, you two are two of the guys that were, you know, welcomed me with open arms. You know, you could have snickered and sneered and said, oh, shoot, here's Coach Shula's kid. What the hell is he doing here? How the hell is he going to help us? And you guys, especially you, Joe, because I had to deal with you more often.
That was tough enough. You earned your money there.
At least it's in the other meeting room. But, you know, you guys and Nat Moore and Jimmy Cephalo and Danny, of course, after he got in, Don Strock, you know, really welcomed me, gave me an opportunity to grow as a coach and learn from you guys. And we had some success and good times together. So I appreciate that. So thank you guys.
You're welcome. And it was great. Listen, we got so many stories and all the characters and stuff. I think we always wonder, your father's the winningest coach of all time in the NFL. And you come to the Miami Dolphins. I was always curious, after playing with the Colts, what was that like when you got there? Was it what you thought it was going to be as a coach?
You know, Joe, I was in law school. I don't know if you know that. I was in law school. You know, I played in 81. I got cut in the summer of 82. I'd gotten into the University of Baltimore Law School, and that's what I did the fall of 82. Leslie and I had just gotten married. She was working for Aetna up in Baltimore. And I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And then if you remember, Wally English gets the head job at Tulane. And you know, he's coaching you. He's coaching the quarterbacks. He's coaching tight ends, quarterbacks, receivers. Right. I'm down on break with with Leslie and staying with my parents. And you guys had two. That was a strike season, 1982. A strike season. You had 9 games. You had to win the last 2. My dad calls and I'm literally going out to play golf on Monday morning. He said, hey, can you come in and just, you know, help out a little bit to get us through these last 2 games? And so I looked, you know, I talked to Leslie. She said, sure, I'll go hang out at the beach. And she had to go back to Baltimore to work the next week. So anyway, you know, now I'm helping out, and then we win both games. And now we're in the playoffs. So I called the dean of the law school, Tony Agnone, who happened to be a player agent as well. And I said, hey, you know, my dad asked me to stay, you know, trying to help out Dolphins in the playoffs. And he goes, hey, you can miss 1 week. You won't like it, but we win again, right? And now I call and he goes, oh my gosh, you know, okay, 1 more week. Now we're in the Super Bowl. So, you know, I didn't get that. I couldn't go back to law school then. I had to wait until the next winter to go back because courses were sequential at that time. And so, as you know, we lose that, you know, the Super Bowl game. My dad calls me in afterwards and says, you know, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I had worked at a law firm in Baltimore the previous winter. Leslie's still working up there. We owned a condo up there. And I said, you know, they've offered to let me come back and work, and then I'll, you know, go back to law school in January when it starts again. And he goes, well, and you guys can appreciate this, right? He looks at me and goes, you know, you didn't screw it up too badly. we did go to the Super Bowl. We didn't win, but he goes, I'll offer you a 1-year contract, and we'll see how it goes. And you know, if it goes well, you can go back to law school in January. If it doesn't go well, it doesn't go well, whatever. So now we got spring of 1983, right, Joe? And we all know what how lucky we got in that draft. And guess who's coaching? Danny, you, Seth, Nat. We had Duke. Mark Duper had come in and was on injury reserve. We draft Clayton. And guess who's their coach, right? I mean, so how lucky was that? And that's how it all started.
Yeah, Dave. Obviously with everything that Don Shula had done, all of his success and everything, it had to be tough on you, kind of walking into that building. Because look, some of the guys, like I know Nat used to work with you when you were in high school, out on the practice field, and helping you out. Now all of a sudden you come in to a team that's been successful, and to a team that now has got not only some aging stars, but a Marino, a Duper, a Clayton, and kind of everyone's looking at you and going, hey, what does this guy got? And and all the pressure. That had to be a pretty pressure-packed situation in your spot.
I guess when you look at it the way you're describing it, I'd say yes. But, I was, I put my head down and fortunately, as I said, we had guys like Stroke, Don Strock, and Nat, and Seth, and Joe, and Bruce Hardy, some really good guys that were very smart players. They understood the situation, and they were willing to give me a chance. And my attitude was, I'm younger than these guys. These guys are 100 times better than I ever thought of being. I'm going to try to learn from them. And they were very kind in sharing knowledge. And then, and then I would grab, Duper and Clayton and our other young guys, and we'd stay after or come in early before, and I'd try to catch them up on one, the playbook, and then two, the techniques, and then the veteran guys would also work with those guys. So it really was a great combination. And my attitude was, I'm not going to come in and try to dictate and be the know-it-all here. I certainly, as sure as heck, I saw all the what the circumstances were and how successful you guys had been, and I just was happy to be a part of it and want to contribute and help it grow.
How about from 10 coaches, I believe, on your coaching staff to like 25 plus now in today's game? You just talked about 3 different positions.
I think they're into the 30s right now.
Yeah. So, as my son Chris is the defensive coordinator with the Rams, he has 14 people underneath him.
Wow.
So, it's like you said, it's I don't think they can meet in the staff rooms anymore. They have to meet in the team meeting room. And that's every staff. And college is the same way. I was coaching at Dartmouth, and I was working a camp out at Northwestern University, and one of their coaches came in, and I said, how many coaches how many were in your staff room? And he said, 56 guys.
Wow.
Between recruits. Yeah, it was crazy. So but hey, the owners are able to afford it, and and that's how the game has evolved, and it's just more opportunities for guys. But yeah, you're right. It's very focused now. You have a tunnel. You coach the tight ends only when they're in right formation or something. I don't know, but it seems to be working.
So what do you think, if you were to pick one thing that that you learned from your father that stuck with you throughout your career, even when it was in his childhood, whatever? Because look, Joe and I talk a lot about your dad, and look, he was tough, but we both look back and go, you know what, I wouldn't want to have another coach, because you learn so much. You learn discipline. You learn to be on. You used to learn life lessons.
Did you say on time?
On time.
I think he said on time. That's a big one. Bo and I get to everything about 2 hours early now.
You learn life lessons. You learn life lessons, and to deal with other people through the course of playing with a guy that, first of all, was a stickler for the rules, was never going to cheat, was never going to cut anything short, and was going to do it the hard way. A lot of lessons to be learned, and we learned it for about 10 years. You learned it your whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was, very blessed to, come into a family with, obviously with my dad and my mom too, was amazing. We lost her, way too young. She was 57 when she died. But, people would say, what was your dad like at home? And not any different. He treated, because I got to work with him for 7 years, so I got to see both sides of it. And he was firm, but he was also would listen to a point. You were not going to get away with any kind of BS type of excuse. We were. I'm the oldest of 5, me, and then we have my 3 sisters, and then Mike was the youngest. And so, the worst thing we could ever hear from my mom was, wait till your father gets home. And he was the hammer, she was the great communicator, and she wouldn't put up with stuff either. But, every now and then I'd get a little sassy and where it brought him into the picture, when that was never a good thing. But now, so now I'm a father and a grandfather, as you guys are. And, I look back at those lessons, and, the fact he was so engaged and that he cared and that he did hold us accountable. I mean, I look at today's young people, and, I just finished, I was coaching at Dartmouth for 6 years. So I got to recruit in high schools for the first time, and just seeing, the lack of discipline coming mostly from the home. Coaches would try, administrators would try in these schools, but it's got to start in the home, and your parents have to be willing to say no, and they have to be able to lay down the rules, be reasonable, but then hold you accountable if you didn't live up to those expectations or play within the rules. And that's the way he was. And, you guys talk about life lessons. The other thing I would say is respect. Respect, Joe, you talked about being on time. He conveyed to me that, being on time means you're showing respect to those that you were planning on meeting with. You show up late, you're being, sometimes things happen, right? But if you're chronically late, you don't really care. Well, what kind of respect is that showing to the people that you've asked to be there on time, right? So respecting them. And then also one thing he told me, as he prepped me as I was just starting to coach with you guys, was, don't ever ask a question or put anybody up on the board if you're not pretty sure that they know the answer. Don't ever embarrass anybody. And that really resonated with me, to coach the guys up well enough to where when you put them on the spot, that they had a really high percentage chance that they were going to get the answer right and not embarrass themselves, and it just goes back to respect, and I think he, as you guys have said, and I've heard many of your peers and guys that he coached, I'll say that you learned so many great lessons, and he held guys accountable. He was tough, but he also, really cared for everybody, wanted success for everybody, cared about you guys and how you were going to be with your families, and then after football, and hopefully taught you some lessons, by his example of how to lead in a proper way.
Chris, we were just talking about your son, Chris, who's the defensive coordinator for the Rams. It's so funny. Our kids all went to school together.
Yeah.
So
I know, right?
It's funny how your Bo's daughter and my son played football with your son, and how this thing has turned out. So as a father now, watching your son coach and figure out game plans, and how much do you talk to him about football?
Yeah, when we talked, he was just down and spent a week with us, his wife, Jen, and they have 2.5 and 1.5-year-olds. So they, when the season was over, Sean McVay gave, the coaches a week off. So they came down here and we got to talk. And really just in big picture terms, Joe, it's, about how is it going with your coaches? Are you giving them an opportunity to express their ideas and show their creativity, and by allowing them to present, and then, what are your plans for R&D this off season, and how are you going to evolve this defense that came along and became very effective as the season went on? They had 3 of their last 4 games. They didn't give up more than 9 points, including a playoff game. And the other game, they didn't play their defensive guys. It was a game against Seattle that didn't count. So, it was an evolution. And so how are you going to grow that? and just talking more in big picture terms, he's got the schemes. He's paid his dues. He was fortunate to be under Wade Phillips when he got there, and then Brendan Staley for a year, and then Raheem Morris. Three outstanding defensive minds that Chris learned an awful lot from over 7 years with the Rams, and so he's taken all their the traits that they had as coaches and the schemes that they had, and then blending that into his beliefs and then taking into account what his position coaches their backgrounds and their beliefs, and trying to mold it into a thing that fits the players that they have. And that's we talk about and you guys probably heard my dad say over the years, it's not so much the talent that you have, the size, the speed, but it's your smart. How smart are you? How are you able to think on the field? What kind of a teammate are you? And those things are, I keep reinforcing those things to him. Not that he needs it, because he pretty much says that to me, and that's how they've been drafting, and that's how they've put together their defensive scheme. As the year went on, they started to figure out what these guys could do, and then just did those things, to be effective. And all coaches fall into this. Sometimes it's a rut, but you're tempted. You have a great idea, you think it's going to work. And I remember Joe, my dad asking me about, I forget, it was early on in the 82 or 83 season, and I had some ideas on, I had an idea on a pass play, and he goes, I got one question. I go, what's that? He goes, will the dumbest guy that's going to be in there on that play, will he know what to do if it's left formation or right formation? And then if you throw movement in. And that really made me step back and say, wow, you got to really, because it doesn't matter how great an idea is if at least the smart guy on the field cannot execute it, and so that was a great lesson.
If you made a mental mistake on our team, you are a real dumbass, because we went over it so many times. And then that third practice, we had that walkthrough at night, which was all mental. It wasn't a workout. It was a third practice, but it was blitz breakoffs to where to line up, checks, and all that stuff. And I used to think, man, he's making this dummy proof, man, because we're doing it so much. You ought to wake up in the middle of the night thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, now that science is progressing, they're showing how, in fact, the president of Dartmouth College is a cognitive psychologist, and she wrote a book and did a TED Talk called Choke. And it basically is, to what you're saying, is the process. And my dad didn't know the science behind this, but he did know this. He said that if you're thinking on the field and not reacting, you have no chance, because your brain cannot process fast enough for your body to make those reactions and movements that you need to be able to do it to play effectively in a football game and in any sport, really. She talks about the yips in golf and all these kind of things. So anyways, so that was it. That's what it was all about. It's about repetition. It's about putting yourself in pressure situations and then repping it to the point where you're not thinking about what you're doing. You're just doing it. And you hear guys, I've seen Michael Jordan interviewed, saying, well, how did you, what did you think when you were making that shot, to win the game, to win the, at North Carolina, win the national championship, or with the Bulls, how many times he made pressure shots? And he goes, I don't know. I didn't think. I was just reacting, being me. And that's that's really what happens. The cognitive side of your brain cannot process it fast enough to let yourself react physically.
Yeah, Dave, you've coached at every level. You played at Dartmouth. You coached with the Dolphins as an assistant. Coached at the Cowboys as an assistant. Head coach with the Bengals. And you go back to college. And this is not about you and it just is about the coaching profession. I've had people, every time you meet somebody, hey, did you ever think about coaching? And I used to tell them, I said, I'll tell you what got me where I know I didn't want to coach. I used to have my defensive line coach, Mo Scary. We would go in the off season. It'd be like 2 weeks after the season was over. We'd kind of go in and get treatment or something. And Moser, I go, Mo, what are you doing here? There's nothing to do. He says, no, we got a lot of work to do. I go, it's like, February or something. You know what? Hell, we don't even go to training camp. He goes, no, we got work to do. I go, what do you do? He says, well, we start from the first page of the playbook. We go all the way through it. We go out through every page and we change it. And I said, Mo, I've been here for 7 years. That playbook hasn't changed one bit. But it's just, so the point I'm trying to make is it's a tedious, I don't think people realize, they think an assistant coach goes out there, goes to practice, goes and has a couple beers, goes home to his family, and then comes back and does the next. The commitment that it takes and the commitment to be able to balance family and balance the job. I don't know how this collection, I don't know how you do. I couldn't do it. I couldn't.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a family, so it was pretty easy for me. And fortunately, my dad was not one of these guys that was going to burn out because he was sleeping in the office. He was getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep during the season. That's not how he saw it. He said, look, you get your work done, you go home, and then family was important. That was a priority to him, along with, doing a good job in the office. But it wasn't going to overtake it. It wasn't to the point where he was tired when the season was over, sure, but he didn't burn himself out, and he had a balance in his lifestyle. And then, to your point, in the off season, there's a lot of detail, not only the playbook, but then depending on the organization you're a part of, whether it's college or the pros, how involved are you in the scouting process and in free agency? And now that's basically the same thing in college, because first thing they do, my brother Mike, as you guys probably know, is now the offensive coordinator at the University of South Carolina. Yeah. So, I'm talking to him about what they do. And the first thing they do is they figure out which guys they want to keep and how much they're going to have to pay them with NIL. It's not a joke. I mean, no. And then they got to figure out, all right, who are we going to recruit based on who's staying or who's leaving, going in the portal. And then same thing in the NFL. You know what the contract situations are. So you got to get with your personnel people and figure out, okay, which guys do we want to prioritize and make sure that we're able to retain those guys. And then what holes are we going to need to fill and how are we going to fill them, either in free agency or in the draft. So, that all takes time. But, you in the off season, you do it in a way where you're not, you're home for dinner. I know a lot of staffs work 4 days a week most of the time, and then you have the off-season programs, which I believe they start in April still. And those are designated number of workouts, and there's a step up as to, just meetings and then walkthroughs and then on the field, when get separate, and then they can come together in 7-on-7 and then eventually team, so that's all a process, and it does take some planning to get all that right, and then you're figuring out what you're going to do in training camp and what your season routine is going to be, and once the schedule comes out, how are you going to, if you got 2 games on the East Coast, you're going to come out and stay for the whole week, and all those kind of things got to be planned.
I said, it's a commitment.
It absolutely is, and I'm barely scraping the barrel there. Yeah.
Hey, I always wonder, the Coach Shula, did he enjoy the draft part of it? Because, now you need so many people. It's gotten so big. And did he enjoy the free agency? And how involved did he get back then?
Well, he was very involved, Joe. As time went on, because of free agency, you had to have more people in the personnel department to study current guys in the NFL, because that was a big part of it. And he really enjoyed all of that. And to his credit, he surrounded himself with some really smart guys, Bobby Beathard early on, and who went on to obviously build that team in Washington that won Super Bowls with Joe Gibbs. And then a guy, Chuck Connors, and, Charlie Winter was a great personnel guy. And he would listen to those guys and pay attention to their recommendations and relied on them to present, their research, literally, going back to high school, college coaches, strength coaches, for guys coming out in the draft and, analyzing what they did at the combine. He enjoyed going to the combine and seeing athletes, in person. So, Yeah, he very much enjoyed all that and had a good feel for talent.
You had some characters. We got to get back to the character thing. I'd hit you with this before because, I mean, you could do stories on those. Those guys are beer drinking stories when you start throwing in Duriel Harris, young Mark Clayton. I always wonder what was like that room for you when you came in, because as they got more comfortable and got to know you, I mean, those guys that, you had to stay on top of some of those guys because talented as hell, but you knew what you were getting.
Yeah. I have to laugh. So, so I start with Jimmy Cephalo, right? So he always sat under the air conditioner in the last seat, and you know where I'm talking about, Joe, on against the concrete block wall, and he'd lean his head, he'd put his hand on it'd be like this, to the point where they had to repaint that wall every year because his hair was oily or whatever. And I would never, he was such a quiet guy. I wasn't sure if he was with it until I asked him a question. And then that was, answered very quickly. He's smart as hell. He knew more than I did. And Duriel, big personality and wanting to be the focus of attention. And so, you had to, Jimmy Johnson once said, I coached with him a couple of years. He goes, you treat everybody the same, but differently, right? Yeah. In other words, you hold them all accountable, but in different ways, right? So with Duriel, you had to let him kind of voice his, let his personality come out some, but then, when it was time to get down to business, all right, Duriel, sit down and be quiet, right? But, you had to say it in a different way. Duper and Clayton, it was such a joy for me to have guys with that talent and the fact they were so competitive and they cared. When I came in, Duper was there in 82 on the injury reserve. And my dad said to me, one of the first things he said to me when I signed on for 83 was, he pointed to Duper's name on the roster and he said, he's your project. This guy could be special. Because I don't know if you remember, he was on the 4x100 world record holding a 4x100 team, a track team at Northwest Louisiana. And he was such a smooth athlete, but he had just literally no idea how good he was and how to transfer that to football, to the point where, it's probably January or February and we're out on the field working, and I'm 23 years old, right? I had just played the year before, year before in the NFL, right? So I wasn't too bad of an athlete, and it's still in pretty good shape. And Duke, in his stance, he would stand straight up, take a false step, and then go. And it was just negating, his explosion off the line of scrimmage. So I turned to him, I said, Duke, I'm going to go in and get my cleats. We're going to race for 10 yards, and I'm going to beat your ass. And he just laughed. Coach, no way. And I came out there and I did. I beat him because my fundamentals, because Nat and then Paul Warfield before him, had worked with me and showed me, how to use every ounce of the limited amount of speed that I had. Yeah. And that was a wake up to Duke. So that was kind of showed, and from that point on, he goes, he's not going to beat me again. So that was just one small thing. And then Clayton, such a great competitor, a naturally savvy, smart football guy. But I can picture him, Joe, and you probably remember too. I don't think we started a meeting, individual meeting or team meeting, where he didn't walk in right as the clock ticked 9 o'clock with a mouthful of food, half of it coming out of his mouth, right? That was just, And then I remember one time, you get in the middle of training camp and guys, it gets a little tedious and, some guys would fall asleep, and I'm sure I know I did a couple of times. But I think Clates it was kind of a problem with him. So I was trying to figure out how can I do something to make him realize he cannot continue to fall asleep in these meetings. Right. One, I'm trying to make it interesting, ask him a lot of questions, but that wasn't working. So one day one of my kids had a squirt gun. I brought the squirt gun in and I shot him with the squirt gun. Everybody got a good laugh, and that kind of helped. But those were, and then it was, watching them evolve on Sundays during the season. And, you remember 83 when Danny started playing in the Buffalo game, and then 84 season. I think there's still some records out there that Danny might have or we might have as an offense. and things that you couldn't coach, right? So I remember in the Pittsburgh in '84 season, we were playing the Steelers. I'm not sure which game it was in the playoff. And you remember our blitz breakoff package, right, Joe? So if you had, more guys coming from the side of the blitz, then Danny was going to throw it to either you or the receivers, making blitz adjustments, right?
Right.
But the guys on the other side, they weren't even supposed to see any of that. Well, the Steelers, they blitz off of the left side. Duper's on the right side. Danny sees the blitz. He knows it's a blitz. He turns and he throws Duper a hitch on the other side of the field. Duper's not supposed to run a hitch, nor is he supposed to see that it's a blitz, nor is Danny supposed to throw it over to that side. Dupe catches it, makes one guy miss, and he runs for a touchdown. So how do you grade that?
Yeah.
Two mental errors, but good job. It was,
Right.
and those are the kind of things that, make you a good coach when you got guys that can, that was the thing with Danny, right? People would ask me about Dan Marino. I'd say he was like this, right? Most coaches or most players, quarterbacks in the league, they come in like this, right? They're the viewers on like racehorses have, right? So they don't see what's happening around them. And then as they get better, it starts to go like that. Danny's came in like that. He could see everything, and then had such great physical tools to be able to get it to where it needed to be accurately and very quickly, and in a catchable ball.
What a group, man. Whoever thought the Marx brothers would be that good. Just unbelievable, not to mention the guys, Duriel and Nat, and how good they were. But the Marx brothers, different level.
So why is it, or the wide receivers, all the prima donnas, the jackasses, the this, the that, the guys that create problems? There's always noise in the meeting room. I'm not getting the ball. Then you got the offensive line down there that are just mules, and they don't want to say a damn word. But boy, I tell you what, those wide receivers, they fill that huddle and they fill that locker room with a bunch of crap, man.
Yeah, I guess it's a byproduct of the talent that they have, and I know when I was in Cincinnati, as a head coach for 4.5 years, when the stuff hit the fan, and I just needed to be around some good people that were trying to figure out how to win and not, bitching or moaning about this or that, I'd go and I'd sit in an offensive line meeting for a morning. For all the reasons that you just said, but I don't know. It's I was one, and I'm sure I acted that way myself as a receiver, but yeah, it's you definitely want to have the attention focused on you, and sometimes it came out in funny little ways.
Hey, Dave, we're going to talk here shortly to is Dr. Bryan Wilner. He's an electrophysiologist from Baptist Cardiac and Vascular Institute. And, I know we were playing golf one day and we were talking, and we both were involved with the AFib. I know you've had AFib, and how you got to take us through what you went through with that. And so I've had it done. I got to get another ablation here pretty soon. And so we're trying to let our listeners kind of get an idea of what that's about. How do you know when you're in it? And so we'll talk to him more about that. But just give us your experience with that and how you got through it.
Yeah, mine was a gradual process, Bo, that started back in the probably in the late 2008, 2009. I was doing a lot of running. I was running marathons and I was doing triathlon stuff, and I come to find out that a lot of it was dehydration. Training down in South Florida, I'd get super dehydrated, and that affected the electrical signals in my heart. So, it started where I could work my way through it. My heart rate would get up, but then I could get it under control. And then I had one day, and I was in 2011, I guess, where it never came down, and my heart rate was about 200. I couldn't catch my breath. I passed out at one point after a workout. I ended up in the hospital, and they shocked my heart back into rhythm. And so I went in, cardiologists, and they saw that I had AFib, and it got to a point too where it wasn't just after workouts or things. It got to be, I remember I was going to work the Manning Passing Academy. I was taking our son Matt was going to be a participant that year, and I would work it. I've worked it most every summer, and I'm sitting in a hotel room the night before, and my heart just goes off, and I'm going, oh my gosh, So then I realized something had to get done. So I looked at the options, and the cardiologist pointed out to me, you could start taking medication, and I didn't want to go that route. I didn't want to have to dial down my activity level or worry about side effects and that. And then they presented the option of this catheter ablation, where they go in, and you probably talked about it, or Doc will talk about it, where they go in and basically burn one of the nerves over your heart that controls the pulses, that controls your heartbeat, and they go in there, find out which one is not acting properly, and burn it far enough apart, because it wants to grow back together. They told me that it doesn't grow back together, and you said they had now this is back in 2011, so I don't know how what's happened since then, but about an 80% chance that first time through it would work, and I was lucky that it did for me. So I'm 14 years post ablation, and I've had no more issues, and I still doing triathlons and doing a lot of running and working out and stuff like that, and I've had no issues there, and then normally. So, but it's if I don't know where I would be if that medical procedure wasn't available, and the doctor didn't spot it and figure out what it was. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Are you on blood thinners for life? Are you on the blood thinner program for life?
No, that was why I did the ablation, Joe, was that I wanted to avoid that if all possible. So, fortunately, I don't take anything any day.
Good for you.
So your activities now are, what were you tell me you're like a 7 handicap golfer now?
I wish, and my partner did, and our member guest at Jonathan's Landing last weekend wishes I was too. But no, so I got into swim, bike, and run, triathlon, sport of triathlon, a long time ago, back in my early 40s, and I've done 4 Ironman and a bunch of other shorter races. I did a half Ironman in North Carolina in October. I'm going to do another one in Chattanooga I've got some great friends from Fort Lauderdale, Cooper City area, and up here in Jupiter that I can train with, and really enjoy doing that. I'm still capable. My knees, my ankles, my heart, obviously, all working together fine, and I'm able to do that stuff. So this morning I had a good little run around, and then went to yoga, stretch out, and then I'll go play golf this afternoon to work on that, I wish would become a 7 handicap.
Good for you, man. Damn.
Hey, we spoke a little bit about at your son, Chris, and I think our listeners would probably be interested to hear about what bringing your son into the family business, not about the X's and O's, and just the way you would talk to your son, or would talk to him when he wanted to get in, and how you see that experience was for him, and how do you make him feel good and give him confidence that he can get that job done.
Yeah, it's so Leslie and I, as they were growing up, we could see, and all 3 of them at one point were coaching. Dan coached our oldest at his last stop was FAU before he got out of it. And he was at Illinois State before. And our youngest, Matt, spent a little time out at University of Kansas as a quality control guy, and was shooting video for the Dolphins for a while, and University of Miami. And so we were, so it's such a great profession. And if you can make your living doing something you're passionate about, and this is what I would tell my guys at Dartmouth, find something you're passionate about and go for it, man. And so if it happens to be football, great. But, you got to go in there with your eyes wide open and knowing that, you live your life in a fishbowl, especially today, with social media. And then also, job security is not great. There's very, very high expectations, very low level of patience to achieve those expectations. So your runway is short, and you got to realize all that, right? So, Chris went in it with his eyes wide open. He was fortunate to get some, he paid his dues in college as a graduate assistant I started at Oklahoma with Joe, their athletic director. and then went to Indiana with some of the coaches from Oklahoma that ended up being coaching at Indiana, and then Ball State. And then he got a chance to go with San Diego as quality control for 2 years. And then his buddy, roommate at Miami, Ohio, Sean McVay, got the head job with the Rams. And he brought Chris in as a quality control defensive line coach. And then over 7 years, worked all three levels and paid his dues. And so, during that time, I remember things that my dad and guys like Mo Scary, Bo, and John Sandusky, Joe, and Carl Tassif, that would say to me, was, just the best way to get your next job, have that ambition, have your eyes on where you'd like to eventually be, but do a great job with the one that you have. Right. And don't be one of those guys where you walk down the hall and the door is closed and the guy's on the phone trying to get another job. Right. Yeah. Which happens. So, focus on the job at hand, do the best you can to grow yourself in that position. You got to be a lifelong learner, never think that you got all the answers. As we were talking earlier, the best idea you have can only be as good as the dumbest guy that's on the field at that time. Don't ask your players to do things that might fit your scheme, but they don't do very well. Your scheme's going to suck because of that. And then, the lifestyle part of it, money now is, it's very lucrative when you get into the NFL and at the major college level. But you got to have a plan as though that this is your last year, right? So save accordingly.
Hey, Dave, let's forget the X's and O's. Put your dad hat on for a little bit here. How proud are you of seeing what he's become?
Yeah, Bo, Leslie and I were watching a Minnesota playoff game, and toward the end, Troy Aikman and Joe Buck just kept raving about what Chris had done, and he'll be a head coach. And Leslie and I look at each other and say, wow, is this really happening? So we're very, very proud, one of the person that he's become, and two, how hard he's worked. And I got to tell you that, watching games now with him as a coordinator, it was, I don't want to say torture because that's not really fair, but it was. Leslie, she would sit where she couldn't hear the sound, but she could see when she wanted to, right in her house somewhere. I never sat down in the fourth quarter because they didn't have any games the whole season that one didn't go down to the very end, except that playoff game against the Vikings. So yeah, it's you live and die with every snap on defense, and but so proud of him and what he's done, and we'll see what the future holds. He's been 1 year as a coordinator, had a great year. Now they got to keep get better, and we'll see. Sean certainly has a great a legacy of coaching, a coaching tree that he's the guys that gone on. Brendan Staley on defense, Raheem Morris, and then you got the Vikings coach, the Packers coach. Who else on offense that are head coaches? Cincinnati coach. They all come from under Sean's tree, and so he's been blessed to work with his best friend, who happens to be one of the great geniuses now of and great coaches. Proven it over what he's been there 8 years, and I think they've won the division 4 times, been to the playoffs I think 5 times, and won a Super Bowl. That's pretty darn good.
Awesome, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
It's been great.
Thanks for taking the time, man.
Thank you.
No, great to see you guys. Thanks for having me on. Best to you and your families, and go Dolphins.
All right, there we go.
We get it going again. Thank you, bud.
You got it. Thank you.
So a lot of good stuff from Dave, and he like we talked about, he came in a tough spot. It just comes
Coach Shula's son.
Yeah, it's Coach Shula's son.
Coach a veteran group of guys
playing at Baltimore for a year, coming back, and then getting here with a group of guys that were. Look, big personalities,
a lot of winning,
a lot of confidence,
really
in themselves.
Good team.
Yep.
And then on top of that, the story of his son being defense coordinator. And by the way, at the end of the year, they're as good a defense as there was in the league. The Rams were unbelievable. Chris Shula's son was fantastic.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff, and so happy for him. Hey, look, stick around. We got a new segment. We're going to go to. It's called Out to Pasture MD. We're going to bring a doctor, Dr. Bryan Wilner from Baptist Health. We're going to talk about Dave's problem with AFib and give you some information about if you're going into AFib, if you want to know what AFib's about, how you get out of it, and all those types of things. New feature for us, out to Pasture MD. Hey, joining us now, Dr. Bryan Wilner. This is going to take me a little time. Electrophysiologist. Did I get that right, Doc?
Yes, that's right.
Electrophysiologist at Miami Cardiac and Vascular Institute, part of Baptist Health, South Florida. And again,
You've been down to see the factory.
I've been down
man.
in that room a couple times now, and I think I'm heading back again, Doc. So talking about AFib, it's I tell you about probably a little over a year ago, I had no idea what AFib was. And the first time I heard it was I heard a commercial with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar talking about AFib, and he's talking about shortness of breath, and I'm going, that's what's happening to me.
You had a bad.
And then I reached out to the doctors, Dr. Eli Friedman, by the way, with Baptist Health, reached out to him, and so I went through the whole process, same as Joe. We went through the cardiovert, which kind of shocks you a little bit and try to get it back in rhythm. That lasted about 4 days, and then I went through we had the ablation, which really was really good for me. I mean, felt like 100%, and it lasted for a long time. And then I think I overexerted maybe and popped back. And so, give me what's your experience been?
No,
Joe?
mine's been great, and the second one has been fantastic. Back to normal. Tennis, boy, I tell you what, Doc, you can tell the difference in your energy.
Yeah.
Almost instantly after you have this done and get that heart back to normal. I took a while because I was on blood thinners and I just figured I was safe. And we hear about the stroke, and obviously that scares everybody, Doc. That gets everybody's attention, right?
So how does AFib occur? Well, what happens when you get into AFib?
Yeah, these are all great questions, and thanks, guys, so much for having me on the show. It's a real honor. So, we'll get right to it. Atrial fibrillation is the most common heart rhythm that we treat. After someone is 65 years or older, 1 in 10 people in the U.S. they have atrial fibrillation. So it's very common, and the reason it's so important for us to make a diagnosis if someone has atrial fibrillation is because we know that AFib can increase the risk of stroke. Yep. So that's really, the reason it's so important. What AFib is exactly is the way the heart normally conducts. You have a beat in the top chamber and then a beat in the bottom chamber. Beat in the top, beat in the bottom. When you have AFib, the top chamber isn't getting a nice coordinated contraction. It's fibrillating. Boom, 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 boom. And when that happens, that causes the heart rhythm to be irregular. So the heart beats out of sync, and it also can beat fast. But also when that happens, because the top chamber is fibrillating and not getting a nice coordinated contraction, blood is not moving well, and that's how clots can form in the heart. And if a clot got pumped out of the heart, it could go to the brain and cause a stroke.
Yeah.
Doc, I got to ask you, people, we all talk with almost all of us that travel with the Miami Dolphins have been in the AFib family now. How long can you go with this AFib thing before it gets real serious and somebody says, hey, you've had this for a while, you need to go get it taken care of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we know that atrial fibrillation is a progressive disease. So how it works and how we see a lot of patients is initially they're going to present with symptoms of feeling fluttering in their chest or palpitations. Other times patients just say, doctor, I just don't feel well. I have less energy. I'm a little more short of breath. So AFib can present in a lot of different ways. But initially, the episodes of AFib will be short. So someone may have an episode for a few hours, and then your heart will go back to normal rhythm. And then over time, as you have more atrial fibrillation, that leads to more episodes. So the episodes will become more frequent, and they can last longer. So, AFib management in the year 2025 is very different from how it was previously. And the reality is the earlier we can be aggressive in the treatment of patients with AFib, the better they do long term, the less burden of AFib they have.
So as I said, I'm I got my Apple Watch and I look and every now I do it and I go, I hope I'm out but I'm back in AFib. and it's affecting me sleep wise. My wife is, you're wheezing, and I can feel, I can tell that you're breathing through your mouth, and so is that affecting? Is that what's affecting my sleep? Because I'm not, it's been pretty.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, as I said, AFib symptoms can present in a lot of different ways. Shortness of breath, fatigue. Clearly, we know that patients who have sleep apnea is correlated with episodes of AFib. So we recommend for all of our patients with atrial fibrillation that they need to get screened for sleep apnea as well.
Wow, I hadn't heard that one. That's interesting. It's funny. I felt like I was having anxiety on the road. You talk about the heart. I could feel. I literally pulled off. I thought something was going on, and that's when I finally went to see Dr. Freeman to find out and found out about AFib, like so many people. But it's something, if you have it or since you have it, get in quickly and get checked by somebody like yourself, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when someone gets diagnosed with atrial fibrillation, such as when you went to Dr. Friedman, the question really is, how do we go about treating it? When do we, say it's time to get this dealt with? And as I said, over the past few years, there's been multiple research studies that have shown that the earlier we can intervene in trying to put someone back into normal rhythm out of AFib, the better they do long term. And, what does that mean, the better? So if we decrease the episodes of AFib you're having, we decrease the risk of stroke. We know that we also decrease the risk of heart failure. When patients are in atrial fibrillation for many years, the blood flow to the brain is different. And there's now been some studies to suggest that there's correlation between AFib and memory problems. So there's a lot of reasons why it's very important for patients, if they have AFib, to be effectively treated and know what their treatment options are. You guys had talked about, the difference between a cardioversion and other treatment options. So if someone is in AFib and they're symptomatic, then again, we try to get them out of AFib back into normal rhythm. Different ways to do this. So one is to do what's called a cardioversion, and that's where we put the patient to sleep for a few minutes. We put pads on the top of their chest, and we deliver energy that basically resynchronizes the heart rhythm back to normal rhythm. And while that's effective and gets people out of AFib, especially if they're symptomatic from the atrial fibrillation, it's kind of just putting a Band-Aid over the problem. It does nothing to decrease the risk of you going back into AFib.
So, Doc, I have a friend of mine that I was speaking to, a little older than me, and he said he's had 3 of the cardioverts, and he's had 3 ablations over different times, and he said after the first 2 they were short, and then after his last he hasn't had any problems for 4. He's run 2 marathons between the third one, and he hasn't had another one. My question is, how many of these multiple procedures does that affect you, negatively if you're getting them over and over and over again?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So the reality is there's, again, multiple research studies to back this up with data, but the earlier we can get someone to an ablation, the better they're going to do long term. Okay. The earlier we ablate, the higher the chance of success and the decreased risk of having recurrent episodes of AFib over time. So, usually when we hear about patients where they've needed 2 or 3 ablations, usually that happens when someone's had AFib for many years and they don't get that first ablation until the heart has already had some negative remodeling from the AFib. So nowadays, again, we're very aggressive in treating patients with AFib, and we're very liberal in who we offer ablation to, because we know that ablation is the most effective treatment option for AFib. And the earlier you ablate, the better the patient is going to do long term.
Doc, before we let you go real quickly, are we set for blood thinner one in the morning, one at night, the rest of our life? Or are we
Eliquis,
done?
I got Eliquis right, always on my hand, always on my hip.
That's a 45-minute discussion right there. So just a quick point on that. So patients always ask, do I have to be on my blood thinner after the ablation?
Yeah.
And that goes back to, risk factors on whether we think someone is at increased risk of stroke. Like I said, we know ablation can decrease the episodes of AFib, but AFib is a chronic disease. There's no cure for it. Even an ablation does not cure AFib. So there's a lot of exciting new data coming out to help answer the question, do I still need to be on the blood thinner long term? But for now, it's still debatable.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I appreciate you being
Hey, Doc, great stuff,
again. So look, for the people that are listening here to this podcast that maybe you're going through this, when I first found out I was getting something done to my heart, it was scary because I'd never had heart problems, and I just try to tell people that I've talked to about it. It's not a big deal. It's you go in, you're out, and one day when they're there for a half a day, you're out. Whether it's a cardiovert, whether it's the ablation, it's nothing to be afraid of. I think both of us been through it. I've talked to a number of people now, and because I had a lot of hesitation in going through it, but I'm over that now.
Absolutely. I think it's important for patients to know that the cardioversion or even the ablation, these are outpatient procedures. Patients are back to living their normal life the next day.
Yeah.
Doc,
Appreciate it, Doc.
man.
Thank you
Great
very
stuff.
much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. You guys have a good day.
Thanks all you guys at Baptist Health. You're keeping us walking, guys.
All right.
All right, Joe, what'd you think about our Out to Pasture MD?
I like that.
Get the doc on there a little bit.
I like that. Same. You can't go wrong with Baptist Health.
No.
To start with.
No, giving you all
but,
that stuff.
Listen, that stuff hit home. That
No
AFib
doubt.
stuff. There's a big family of AFibers.
Well, I'm back. I'm heading.
You're
back.
going too. Let me
I'm
know. I
heading
hope
down
you're
there.
the only one that has to go too, and that's it.
Heading down there in a week or two and get that thing done. But hey, hope you learned something there, and hope you enjoyed the whole show. And this kind of format we're going to get to a little bit more, getting those doctors and giving them some time to breathe and talk about it a little bit. But it's all Out to Pasture, and Out to Pasture MD. And you know what? Got our sponsors from Scales always with us
Great
here.
stuff.
You can check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. You can find us on there. And Joe, we're starting to get some momentum here with the show.
Well, we got to roll, and David Shula was fantastic.
Yeah.
Talking,
well, as long as we have guests like that, we're going to do all right.
We'll be all right.
All
We'll be in good shape.
You guys stick around. Out to Pasture. We'll see you out there.